the father's gift. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when the father, James, sat on the couch in his living room. His two children, Delvion and Sonia, were glued to their phones, scrolling endlessly through social media. James had noticed that this had become a routine. Hours spent on their devices, little engagement with the world around them, and hardly any time spent as a family. It made him sad to see them so disconnected from the world and from each other. One evening, James called them into the living room. He had a gentle but firm look on his face. "Kids, we need to talk," he began. "I've noticed that you're always on your phones and you don't do much else. It's time to make a change. There's a whole world out there to experience and you're missing it." Delvion and Sonia listened, but the words didn't seem to land. They nodded and promised to spend less time on their screens, but nothing changed. Days went by and the same pattern continued. James felt discouraged. One day, he opened up to a close friend over coffee. "I don't know what to do. I've tried talking to them, but they just don't listen," he said. His friend smiled knowingly. "You know what? Kids need something more than just words. They need a challenge. Why don't you give them a book, one that could change their perspective? And maybe, as a little motivation, tie it to something they care about. Like a reward." James raised an eyebrow. "What kind of book?" "I have one I adore," his friend said, pulling out a worn, well-loved book from his bag. It's called How Would You Like to Be Remembered? It's about finding your purpose, leaving a legacy, and thinking deeply about the impact you want to have on the world. James smiled, intrigued by the idea. That evening, he gathered Delvion and Sonia again in the living room. "Children," he said, his voice light but serious, "I have an activity for you and a challenge. I want you both to read this book together." He held out the book. It's called How Would You Like to Be Remembered? "I want you to read it over the next month and give me a summary of what you learned. If you don't, well, you can say goodbye to your holiday plans." Delvion groaned. "Oh, reading's boring." "If you think reading's boring, then your holidays will be even more boring," James replied, crossing his arms with a smile. "No travel, no restaurants, no fun trips, just staying home." Sonia smirked. "Is that a challenge, Dad?" James nodded. "Do you want to bet?" "Okay, Dad, we will," Delvion said, feeling determined. The next day, the children took the book to their room. At first, they were reluctant. But as they read, they became intrigued by the stories and ideas inside. The book asked questions they had never considered. How do you want to make a difference in your community? What values matter most to you? What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind? Over time, Delvion and Sonia found themselves discussing the book's themes with each other, sharing their thoughts about how they'd like to be remembered and what kind of impact they wanted to have on the world. They started thinking less about social media and more about how they could contribute to something bigger than themselves. A month passed, and the day of the summary arrived. The children sat in front of their father, book in hand. "Dad," Sonia began, "thank you for giving us this challenge. Reading the book changed the way we think about our lives. We've been so focused on temporary things, but now we realize there's so much more we can do." Delvion nodded in agreement. "We want to make a difference in our community, Dad. We want to be remembered for something meaningful." James beamed with pride. "I'm so proud of you both," he said softly. Just as they were about to leave for their holiday, something surprising happened. The children stopped their father before he could pay the bills for the trip. "No, Dad," Delvion said. "We've been thinking, and instead of going on vacation, we'd like to use the money for something else." Sonia chimed in. "We want to get certificates in coaching and leadership. We think it'll help us become the kind of people we want to be." James smiled warmly. "Of course," he said, his heart full of joy. And from that day forward, the family's bond grew stronger. The children not only gained knowledge from the book, but also discovered a deeper sense of purpose, something that no social media feed could ever provide. This story shows how a father's love and wisdom, with the help of a meaningful book, can inspire his children to change their perspective and find purpose in their lives.